Okay. I think we are live. I always get confused on YouTube. Sometimes you think you're live when you're not, but I'm pretty sure that this is now currently live. So joining me today on the assumption that we are in fact live is a very special guest. And I just wonder, Barbara, if you could say a little bit about who you are and what you do before we get started.
Oh, okay. Um, I'm a professor of philosophy at the University of Notre Dame. This is my fourth year here. Before I was teaching at CUNY for a number of years. Um, I work on a number of different topics, but usually connected in some way to the mind and the body and the relationship between mind and body.
Yeah,
I
very
guess.
cool. And I think that in your like a lot of your work, you've kind of at least to some degree emphasized the body aspect.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have two. Sort of. Okay, so there's work on the body. Yeah, there's two different ways in which I work on the body too. Um, I have written about such things as proprioception, our bodily sense of where our position of our limbs is in space, and so that's very bodily. But I also research and think about and write about body in the sense of the mind-body problem,
Hmm.
which is the idea of the physical or the relationship between the mind and the body or the mind and the brain. So I've thought a lot about what the body side of the mind body problem means.
Excellent.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, I want to talk about this new book that you're working on. I guess is it okay if we tell people that you're working on a book? I guess I
Yeah.
should have asked you before we started.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Um, I'm now wondering, like, are you going to ask me the working title? And I'm going
No,
to
I'm not. I'm
blank. You
not.
know, it's still in
Yeah, I know
progress.
we got like several
But
working
okay,
titles. I
all
know
of a
that
sudden,
much.
not sure, but what is my title?
It is a book though, and it's a cool book. And I think that I think of myself as someone who's convinced by your argument, although I'm here to find out if that's true, let's say.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
yeah, I do think that it's an interesting and important view. But that is under discussed, I think. So it's good to have you talking about it. But first, before we get to this new and interesting view, would you consider yourself to be a physicalist? Like, is your goal to defend physicalism,
Hmm.
or just to like point out a neglected option, or like do you care like about the success of the
Hmm.
argument in this way?
Yeah. Well, I think the groundwork for what counts as being a physicalist is in some ways too restrictive, I
Hmm.
guess. I um and I'd like to, and I'm more interested, I'd say, in showing how there's a view that should be a physical, that most people who consider themselves physicalists would find acceptable and would seem to be physicalistically attractive, and that would be excluded as physicalism, though, given what are the typical debate. And I'd like to make room for
Hmm.
a new way of thinking about the issues.
Right. Okay.
And it is the way I'm interested in thinking about the issues.
I see.
Yeah, so whether I am, it sort of depends on what definition we're going to use, but I'm trying to change the definition. So
I see. So I guess yeah, I would say if you were a traditional or standard kind of from the 90s on physicalist, then you're going to say you're not that kind of physicalist, but you think that your view is a kind of physicalism.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think there have been philosophers that have focused on what I'm interested in is making room for. I mean, I think you're a philosopher like this, and I other philosophers who focus on questions about the mind, the relationship between the mind and the brain in more empirical way.
Hmm.
Um, so Peter Godfrey Smith, Dan Dennett, the Churchlands, they were looking at more empirical aspects. I think they're not concerned about the more metaphysical issues about what could happen in merely metaphysically possible worlds.
Hmm.
And so those philosophers, there have been those philosophers, but they haven't really maybe ever been brave enough to say, "Oh, I don't care about the metaphysics. That I anything can happen in the metaphysical realm. It won't matter to me." But I
Okay.
think that's often how they proceed.
Right. Okay. So you're giving voice to that idea, which you think is often already held amongst them.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think so.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. That's often the fun part is to see.
yeah,
But so one of the questions that I had was how we situate this view, and I know a lot of this stuff is going to come up as we go through this discussion. But so physicalism. One question that you might have is like,
yeah,
what even is a physicalist view? Which is
yeah,
partially, I think, what you're trying to get at. But
yes.
one way that I think we very much agree on, at least I think, is that whatever else you mean by physicalism, what's kind of at the core of it is that the mind shouldn't stick out like a sore thumb, so to speak, from the rest of the stuff. So, as I usually say, I will be happy if consciousness turns out to be like water, by which I mean gets handled by science in the same way, whatever way that is. So that
Hmm.
if the way that we understand consciousness turns out to be similar enough to the way we understand water, then I'm going to say that's physicalism. And a lot of stuff in between can kind of vary. But what matters is that consciousness is treated like all the other stuff. So is that a way? So if I gone beyond the way you would put it, or would you agree with that way of putting it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I have in the past said one way to understand physicalism is the idea that the mind fits into the world, like very roughly, but this is speaking so roughly,
Mhm.
generally, like anything else does, that there isn't something unique and special about, of course, everything is special in its own way. Every child is special, and the mind, of course, is
Yeah.
special in some way. It's the only thing that has mental properties, but that there isn't some thing that's going to make that. I mean, ultimately, I think that sort of suggests that um, it, yeah, it would need a radically different type of understanding of the world to make sense of the mind. So, but whether it's going to be ever accounted for by science, maybe it's just too complicated. Maybe it won't. So
Hmm.
I don't know if we'll ever understand it in the way we understand water. Maybe that's going to be beyond us forever. But I think that whatever the relationship is between um, the chemical and the biological, or the of quantum physics and the chemical, which we don't know what how really the relation is. That's very roughly going to. I mean, do I know this? No, I'm going to really remain agnostic, but I'm going to say that I think is the sort of core of the physicalist commitment.
Right.
I don't actually take a stand because I feel. I mean, I just by my nature, I'm very much very empirical. Have we figured it out yet? No. Well, then we don't know. I
Right.
mean, I don't know yet. I don't see any, what I would say is I don't see any philosophical reasons to think that it's going to be impossible to understand the mind, maybe through better understanding the brain. Will we be able to? Is it in principle possible even? And that I can't say
Hmm.
because I feel that this is something that we learn through science, not through philosophical reasoning. At least I don't have the capacity to figure that out philosophically.
Exactly. You're not alone here, trust me, because no one has.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So
definitely
yeah,
not just you.
so I look towards the science and want to see, the latest discovery and
Right. So,
yeah,
and I really appreciate this way of approaching these kind of problems. And so, in the first chapter of your book, you try to present this as like engaging in what you call a metaphysical leap, or at least at one point you call like a leap in this sense, where you
yeah,
you reason about something, you come to the conclusion that it's metaphysically possible, and then comes the leap where you go, oh, and because of that, there's something about the actual world that is or isn't a certain way.
Yeah.
And it's that, I think, where you're trying to really put your foot in and say, look, it's why this leap here from
Yeah.
the metaphysical to the possible is not really, excuse me, from the metaphysical to the actual. It is not, it needs a defense and there isn't a good one.
Yeah. Um, yes. I'm noticing, or do some people think this? No. Okay. Um, Thank you. I'm in a study room and some people I thought were trying to come
Oh,
in, but
okay.
okay, no. This is my study room.
Okay.
Okay, I'm glad, Richard. Richard, you've read a lot of the book. And what I'm happy about what you just said is that you sort of picked up on the metaphysical leap as a sort of key feature of the book, because I am thinking about that as my title, sort of something. The
Okay.
metaphysical leap will be in the title. So, yes, so I think that a lot of philosophical reasoning, especially in philosophy of mind, and especially starting with Descartes, starts with the assumption that, well, through pure reason, we can identify certain metaphysical possibilities, certain things that are merely metaphysically possible if we were to change the laws of nature. So, and then from that, we can make conclusions about actuality.
Right.
Many philosophers have questioned the move from what we can imagine or clearly conceive to whether something is possible. So I can clearly conceive of let's see, a horse with wings. Okay, that's metaphysically possible. Okay, so many philosophers have questioned whether that's a valid move.
Mm-hmm.
And I say, let's just leave that. There's some questions one can, but let's just say that that is. Let's say that, I mean, I guess I don't know how else we're going to find out about what metaphysical, if there is a metaphysical
Exactly. We can't
reality,
fly there. I mean, you know.
how else? Yeah, we're not going to fly there. So, okay, so we have let's say we have knowledge of what's metaphysically possible and what's not. And what I question is the next move to conclusions about what the actual world is like. That's what I count as the metaphysical leap, the leap from mere metaphysical possibility of something to the actuality of that something.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And what I want to kind of ask you about in this area to start off with is some ways that you try to clarify and distinguish what you are and what you aren't objecting to. So for example, in the book, you list three other kinds of cases where you're like, these are okay and not the ones that I'm going after. And you cite, for example, the modal argument for God's existence, that if God possibly exists, then if he possibly necessarily exists, then he
yeah,
does, because that follows from the fact that it's a necessary thing. But it's
yeah,
not a metaphysical leap there. And then you say, because there's something about the contingent fact. In the cases that are bad, the metaphysical thing is contingent, but in the cases that are good, the metaphysical thing is necessary. So but yeah, I'm not sure I got
well,
this right.
I
So
mean, yeah, I mean, good, whether the ontological argument is good or can be questioned, but I'm just not going to question whether one can move from the denial of a necessity to say that, or the possibility of a necessity to that necessity.
right.
So that is just an area
So
I'm
you
not
don't want
going
to
to
object to
touch on.
S5 is what you're saying. It sounds like.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't want to object to S5.
Good.
I might, though, actually do. I do object to
Okay.
S in parts of the book you haven't yet read. I'm
Okay.
sort of thinking I object to even S4.
Oh,
So
interesting.
yeah, but I'm just thinking about that. I don't know if I have to make that claim, but I feel like sometimes I'm saying, well, let's just assume, okay, let's say this something is necessary, but imagine that it's not necessary.
Yeah.
That's sort of saying that if something is necessary, it's not necessarily necessary. So,
Right.
but no, I'm just going to, right. The possibility of a necessity, I'm not going to touch. So,
So the reason why I brought this up is because, well, first of all, it's good to kind of clarify what you mean by the leap.
mhm,
But on the other hand, it made me wonder, like, when do you do this and when do you don't do this? Because, for example, like the zombie argument, something we'll talk about later, maybe. Although we can't talk about everything all at once, so who knows? But so the zombie argument is usually portrayed as starting off with this first premise of P and not Q, where P is all the physical truths and Q is the denial of some phenomenal truth, like that I have a headache or whatever. Okay, so that looks like a contingent thing. But there's a flip side of that where there's a necessary fact where you could say that there's a conditional statement, which is if dualism is true, it's necessarily true, which is that necessarily, if all there is in a certain world is our physics, then there is no consciousness there. So you could move from that necessary fact, if it were necessary, to, well, then in the actual world, there's got to be more than just our physics. So that style of argument wouldn't be making the leap on your view.
Let's see.
That's what I'm kind of
Okay,
wondering.
so let's see. Okay, interesting. Okay, so the dualist says, I don't know if the dualist is committed to that, right? The dualist says, I think the dualist is committed in our world. We are immortal, let's say, souls. Let's have a real full-blooded dualism.
Okay.
And our minds are going to, in some sense, persist after our bodily death. Does that mean does that mean that if I were to do they have to have the metaphysical commitment that in some other possible world that my brain wouldn't give rise to my mind and that the mind wouldn't, I don't know. I mean, do they have to have that commitment or they? So your idea was the dualist is committed to the idea that in any it's necessarily the case that bodies do not give rise to minds.
Just bodies.
Just bodies. On all metaphysically possible worlds.
Yes.
I
mean, I thought
we never get minds from just bodies.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, if just to say why I think that is that if it weren't that way, then P and not Q wouldn't be an objection, because P and not Q is the only reason that matters, that possibly P and not Q, is if this necessary conditional statement is what dualism is a matter of, or what physicalism is a matter of. And then you're trying to falsify it.
Well, I see physicalism. I mean, that's what I'm objecting to in physicalism, that it should be stated in terms of the necessary entailment. So
maybe you'd object in the same way for the dualist, then, is what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that what matters to dualists or should matter. I mean, if that's fine. If your focus is on the metaphysical reality, that's fine. But I think it's okay to just say that it's open what happens in metaphysical possible worlds. My concern is with this world.
So if there were a dualist who said, here's a necessary truth, and from it I infer the actual falsity of physicalism, you would say, I want to argue about that first premise, but you're not making the leap.
Yeah, right. I mean, from necessary truths, I follow actual. I mean, if it's necessary, then it falls in our world too. So that is, I don't object to that.
Okay.
That seems, that's a hard one to object to.
Okay.
If it's necessary.
So what you're objecting to is that they would be committed to that claim in some serious way, that you would think that this would work
exactly.
against them.
I mean, or that they have to be to consider themselves as a dualist. Some dualists are, but why not just, can't there be a dualist who rejects, I mean, then of course, trivially, it sort of would fall in all metaphysically possible worlds because there are none, but in some trivial sense, but still, who just doesn't have concerns about the metaphysical possible worlds and doesn't make commitments about them and just has commitments to this world.
Yeah, so this is, I guess, in Chalmers's terminology, what you might call Aquinian type Q physicalist. Is that what you're thinking of, or something else?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, that's a sort of a way to warm up the intuitions in favor of my view, because Quine sort of had to have a physicalistic view that's just about our world, because he didn't want to talk in terms of modalities. So, in our physicalism is true. If any higher level change in our world, there's going to be a lower level change too, which is sort of trivial because there's always going to be these lower level changes. But he did try to state it in terms of our world.
Hmm.
But 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 in a way, trivially, since if he's right there, if there's no metaphysically possible worlds, he could say, and in all metaphysically possible worlds too, because there are none. So, but I want to go further than that. That's a sort of way of warming up the intuitions to say Quine should be counted as a physicalist, but he doesn't really have commitments to metaphysical reality.
Right.
But beyond that, what it, I think I'm interested in explaining the mind in terms of the brain and all other lower level, all other relatively higher level features of the world in terms of lower level, and just explaining things scientifically, however that explanation is going to go. There could be someone, and metaphysical possibilities. Well, there are a lot of odd things that happen there. There's faster than light travel that doesn't impinge on my ability to understand the speed of light in our world.
Hmm.
Similarly, there are zombies in other metaphysically possible worlds. Well, that's not going to impinge my ability to understand the mind in this world. And I
Yeah.
don't see why I should care about those worlds.
Right.
Is sort
This is the part that
of,
I like about the view, and that I find convincing. Although I'm not. This is the part where I'm also confused. So I agree that, like, I remember back. Well, I shouldn't say back, but I remember thinking at a certain point in my trajectory of, like, are really people taking the zombie argument seriously? Because at first I was like, this can't be real, that they're taking it seriously. And
hmm.
but part of my
Mhm.
reaction to why would anyone take it seriously was because of this question about what does it have to do with, like, what's happening in my brain.
Oh yeah.
Like, so that possible, and I've heard Ned Block say similar things where he says, like,
Oh.
their problems aren't our problems, which maybe he
Hmm.
doesn't mean the same thing by that I'm saying right here. But the way I would interpret something that is like, what have they got to do with us? Like, yeah, these,
Yeah, that's the book I'm writing for
right,
him.
exactly. So,
I
so,
guess.
so I definitely share that kind of. I sympathize with that. What have they got to do with us? Kind of pushback.
Hmm.
Um, and part of me wonders, like, all right, so we know that there was in the history of the universe a group of guys already saying this, and those are the old identity theorists who also claimed contingent identity. So they would say the mind is the brain here, but it could be something else
Hmm.
somewhere else, just like
Hmm.
because it's contingent, the identities between these things.
Hmm.
And that view is largely thought to be refuted. Maybe it's not, but is that similar to your view, or is that a version of this kind of view?
Well, well, I mean, okay, so there's a couple of things. I mean, not all of the identity theorists were necessarily so physicalistic, like Feigl, who thought that the brain was made out of qualia. But but I mean, there's a couple different ways to think about this, I think. And I think, yeah, I don't think there is any hard and fast refutations of contingent identity. Um, I, but also what it's sort of a little terminological too, whether you want to say the mind is because of these metaphysical possibilities, that the mind is not identical to the brain. Yeah, but all that means, this is what I think that's where I end up in this chat. Yeah. I mean, that another way is to just say all that means
Hmm.
is that it's metaphysically possible for them to be separate.
Hmm.
And okay, so what? Yeah, in word, we're saying something about this world, but it actually has no implications for this world, this non-identity, except for some like trivial ones. Maybe the person who supported it in the philosophical argument is going to get tenure or something like that. But it doesn't, our brains and minds aren't going to stand in different relationships in this world if it's identical or not. So, and I think Descartes was aware of this
Hmm.
in his argument for the real identity, because he concludes from his that the mind is okay. We can conceive of the mind and brain as distinct. Um, So they could be made distinct by God. So they are, his word, really distinct. But then what he means when he explains it elsewhere out of the meditations by really distinct, it means it's possible to have one without the other.
Right. Not that they
All we get,
actually are one without the
not
other.
that they actually are. The real distinction is a possible distinction. So that's all we get. Whether you want to call that contingent identity or non-identity, it's sort of I feel, a terminological issue, but we don't get anything else. We don't ever make the metaphysical leap. We don't ever get a leap to saying something about the actual world.
Uh-huh. So, yeah, it's such a cool and interesting idea because it's slippery and hard to nail. It's hard to actually put your mind around. As soon as you do, it like plops over there because one reason you might want to resist this link between the metaphysically possible and the actual is that it does sort of seem like, how else do you explain like invention or creativity in
Interesting.
bringing
Okay.
about things in devices, objects in the world which didn't exist previously, except insofar as you kind of conceived of their possibility, were led to their possibility, and then brought the world to be that way. And then in other cases, it's like you can't do that. Like no one makes the square circles and stuff like that. So it
Oh,
does
this
look
is
like
so interesting.
possibility is a
Okay.
guide to actuality, at least in some cases, right?
Yeah.
Or no?
Well, what's interesting about this, bringing up this connection, is because I'm teaching a class right now on creativity, and I never really brought up connected the creativity with the idea of metaphysical possibility.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that creativity is connected to nomological possibility, not mere metaphysical possibility, because we have to be creative in this world with our actual laws of nature.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think that considering nomological possibilities is useful and, yeah, can help us in our reasoning about this world.
Uh-huh.
Um,
But when you're reasoning about like when you're thinking about how to build a better pump or a new kind of engine, like a combustion engine, let's say, or steam engine, and you're trying to think about how the parts go together and so forth and so on. On your view, you're only reasoning nomologically, but not metaphysically in those cases. But
mhm.
one a subset of the other?
Yeah, the nomological is a subset
But how do you know
of
what
it.
you like?
So
Because you might not
you're
know
not
what the.
reasoning merely metaphysically.
I see.
You know, you're of course it's nomological and metaphysical, but it's not merely metaphysical. And what I mean by merely is metaphysical, but not nomological. Yeah,
Hmm.
I should always say that.
But
But
because it does bring up the Descartes point in another way, where you might wonder whether Descartes meant to end the conclusion with a nomological possibility, as opposed to a metaphysical possibility, when he says it's possible they're come apart.
hmm,
Because if you're trying to aim for if you're trying to reason nomologically, if you're
interesting.
saying, look, I'm not reasoning. What I'm trying to imagine is someone trying to respond to you in the way you're saying is a good case. And they might say, look, I'm reasoning nomologically. I'm reasoning about what can come
Mhm,
apart in the
mhm.
actual world, and it
Yeah,
just seems like they come apart here.
I see.
But
Yeah.
is
Well,
that is
that's
that
it.
get around your
Okay.
objection or?
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't considered, that's interesting, whether Descartes meant, well, by real distinction, I mean possible distinction,
Mhm.
whether he meant nomologically possible. Um, my sense is not, he sort of is talking about what God could do in his possibility. But I mean, also, it's hard for me to see how one I mean, I guess if you had full understanding of the mind and the brain, which we don't, and you could understand how they do sort of, I mean, but then you're just reasoning in the nomological realm.
Right.
You're not breaking any laws of that known laws. So from that reasoning, yeah, I think you could see if you follow it through, we had a good enough understanding of the mind and the brain. Reasoning, yeah, about possibilities in the actual world you can get, but reasoning about possibilities that are not achievable in the actual world, but only in worlds that have different laws of nature.
Hmm.
I don't see how one could ever get to a conclusion about what would happen in this world with our laws of nature.
But that sort of assumes you know what the laws of nature are, but beforehand, and some of them might be
Um,
these like psychophysical laws, which would still be laws of nature on that view. Not that I endorse that
mhm,
view, but I think that those people who do, like Chalmers, think that these views are part of nature. They're natural laws. They're just special psychophysical laws. So that if you knew all the laws, then you would easily connect them up because these laws connect those to that. So that in that case you would be reasoning kind of like the ideal reasoner at the end of inquiry kind of almost would be reasoning nomologically at that point and wouldn't be making any leaps, it sort of
mhm.
seems like.
Yeah, well, I guess Chalmers thinks that it's everything else is apart from the mind, we could deduce logically
Right.
from what we know about the world. Um, and well, if then, the mind, and is able to somehow see that the mind can't be deduced in that way. Um, well, then the mind would seem to sit in a different relation. Everything else in the world is logically deducible from fundamental physics except the mind. Okay.
That makes it stick out.
Yeah, so then that would be a difference. I'm skeptical that okay, so I mean, I don't know if that impinges on my idea that so does every physicalist though have to think that there's a priori logical deductions? No.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean,
No.
one can be like, I'm not saying Chalmers can't hold that position. I'm saying there's room though for someone to be a physicalist and not hold this a priori deducibility. I mean, it seems to me a very view that's very counter to, I mean, it's no wonder I think that, okay, well, Jackson's no longer dualist, but that someone who is not so sympathetic to physicalism would try to find the most difficult, stringent requirement
Yeah.
for the deduction. And I mean, things I've said in other papers and think is, I just would like one example of just the most simplest thing written out in first order logic of such a deduction, if it's supposed to be a priori deducible. Just the simplest relation between some type of cell and some type of
Yeah.
quantity. No,
No.
never, just one example. And also the argument that, well, the thing is, we can see though that all the physical stuff could be a priori deducible because it's all structural, yet the mental is not. Well, just because, well, there's a number of things I say about this, but just because one thing is of a different kind doesn't
Mean
doesn't mean
it's
it's not deducible also. And also, what is this structure? It's difficult to identify what it is, that
mhm.
everything is the physical is supposed to be entirely structural. It often includes the mathematical. Well, how do people understand the mathematical? A lot of people understand it as a product of our minds. We've already got minds in there in the structural then. So it's easy to deduce the mind from it. Um, so
Exactly. And this is something I think that a lot of people get confused about because they're like, okay, so what are all these physical facts? And is the fact that some of them are identical to mental facts can mean that those have to be included in the physical facts? And
mhm,
if so, then deductions are easy if you get these identities.
yeah.
If you really to know what the physical facts are required to know that they're identical, some of them to the mental.
Mhm.
So, and a lot of people stumble over this, I think, in their thinking. So it's cool that you're bringing this up. But let me try to play devil's advocate because
Yes.
I want to try to take your view like seriously. I mean, I think we already are, but I mean, I picture it.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I didn't mean to take it serious. I mean, like paint a picture where it is true, and then ask a question about it. Because what
Okay,
you're
let's
saying,
try.
basically, as I hear you, is well, there's lots of ways to be a physicalist. So you could say identities aren't necessary and still be a physicalist. You could say there are no possible worlds at all and be a physicalist. You could say
Mhm.
supervenience of the mental on the physical fails and be a physicalist.
Or
So
they're
that
necessary, but it's just that the necessity is just something about a metaphysical possible world that we don't care about.
exactly, or even that it's so exactly. So there's all these different ways of being a physicalist, and I'm saying, yeah, I'm thankful that you're bringing these up because a lot of the discussion has focused on this very narrow definition offered to us by an opponent, really, Chalmers,
Yeah,
who's a
exactly.
nice opponent, but still letting the opponents set up the debate
Yes,
sometimes doesn't work out for
exactly.
you, and I think that's part of what's going on here. So,
That's
but
a
still,
nice
let's
way.
imagine then there is this
Okay.
possible world where
Alrighty.
supervenience fails, identities are not necessary, whatever you want to say about it. And
Mm-hmm.
that possible world is physically identically like ours. So that there is someone like me there, maybe not me exactly,
Mm-hmm.
but someone physically identical to me. And
Mm-hmm.
that person physically identical to me has no differences in any physical way of these
Mm-hmm.
narrow physical properties, which we'll say are
Mm-hmm.
things like quarks and electrons and so forth,
Mm-hmm.
and the laws that govern them. And yet, you're fine saying there's no pain there, or that because I get migraines that they're going, oh man, I need my sumatriptan, but there's no migraine that they're actually experiencing, or whatever conscious, I tend to focus on migraines a lot because I hate them, but whatever, the
Oh,
excitement of
yeah.
this
Sorry.
conversation, whatever it is, they're doing all of this, but there's nothing inside mentally. And you say, yeah, I don't care. And then we say, oh, what? But they're physically just like me. And you go, yep. And then we go, but then wouldn't they be mentally just like me? And you say, nope. So like,
Well, I don't say nope. I say they might not be. I really don't know. Like,
okay,
it takes some investigation into the metaphysical possible worlds to determine what they're like. And I don't have insight into them myself.
uh huh.
But I think
So you're
I'd
not you're
like
not
to,
saying they do lack consciousness.
I don't know. I really don't know
Oh, okay. But then aren't you not really
whether these,
doing the thing you're supposed to be doing, which is saying that zombies are possible?
I
Because
think
we have to
one
say they
can
don't
be a
have
physicalist,
consciousness.
yet say zombies are possible. Or one can be a physicalist and say supervenience fails. Does it? I don't know. I mean, I'm one who doesn't have much insight into metaphysical possible reality. I don't have the ability to, which some philosophers say, to really think about it and get insight into these metaphysical possible worlds. I really don't know. But I feel that the physicalist, it doesn't turn, for the truth of physicalism, need not turn on what's going on in those worlds,
Uh-huh.
if they exist at all.
But let's stipulate that what's going on is that they're physically just like us, but there's no
Okay.
pain.
Okay.
Okay. So
As long as I
why
mean,
doesn't that bother you?
yeah. Okay. So, well, I mean, there's a few different ways to maybe get at this intuition of why I don't think it should. And the first step might be is, well, eliminativists certainly could be perfectly happy with that view.
Yeah,
They're physicalists.
but I don't think they
Okay.
are.
You don't think eliminativists are
Of course
physicalists?
not. No, physicalism is a view about consciousness. They deny the existence of consciousness.
Okay, okay. I guess there's a lot of different. Okay, maybe they think the world is there's sort of a two different. Remember, Jackson has this response to my. You can think physicalism about the world or physicalism about the mind. Maybe they think the world is entirely physical. Okay,
But but
so
but they but they'd be wrong if they think that consciousness is not part of it. Like I'm not going to negotiate on
yeah,
that. Like
okay.
they're not in the group.
So okay. So well, all supervenience can also fail even if the identity theory is true. If it just fails at the level at the between the chemical and the quantum.
Right.
So identity theorists, or some type, or some non-reductive physicalist between mind and brain, then you still get. Um, it's just that we don't get chemical bonding from quantum mechanics. Doesn't seem to be that would be problematic for the physicalist, even a physicalist about the world. Well,
Hmm.
so chemical bonds are sort of unusual, but that's just how the world is built. They're sort of unusual in the metaphysical sense. They're metaphysically unusual. Sort of like the speed of light is metaphysically unusual. It's not set. Worlds that are
But so
identical to us in the narrowly physical, the quarks and leptons and all the exchange particles and the forces, they don't have chemical bonds. Okay.
Okay, I mean, yeah. So I want to talk about that speed of light thing that you brought up because you've said it a couple times now, and
Mhm.
so I think that the idea there is that the speed of light is a constant. Nothing can go faster than it, but it doesn't seem like metaphysically impossible. So probably there are possible
What
worlds
people say.
where the speed of light is different, even though in this world it's set at the rate that it is.
Yeah.
That's the basic idea.
Yeah. Or
Okay.
that's what people say at least.
Yeah, exactly. And then so what you're basically saying is so also maybe like you can't rule it out, maybe with consciousness or the mind it's
Mhm.
like that way here, even if like you can like yeah it could vary other places, but here it's
Yeah.
this way.
Hmm.
Okay, so the question that I have about this strategy, which I like, remember, so I'm not trying to object really, I'm just trying to get your to hear what you have to say about it.
Yeah.
The question that I have is, well, you hear physicists talking about faster than light travel as a possibility,
Mm-hmm.
as like a rational thing to be looking for, or to
Oh, I
not
see.
to be afraid of. Like
Mhm.
it's just So they're sort of open to the world being that way, maybe even if they don't have, even if they think the evidence is that is not. So they're not like closed off to it. And
Mhm.
I would say that maybe the reason why some of them are not closed off to it is
Mhm.
precisely because they recognize that it's a way our world could be, which is the metaphysically possible stuff.
Mhm.
So if it's a way our world could be, then it looks like, well, you got to explain why our world isn't that way. So I'm wondering
Yeah.
about if you put metaphysical possibility in terms of like how our world
Mhm.
could have been instead of could be. So one is
Yeah.
like epistemic,
Well,
how
right.
it could be for all I
Hmm.
know, and the other is like it could
Well,
have been this way. It
mhm.
just isn't.
I
So,
mean, that's perfectly fine if you, I mean, but I think that in as much as they become open to that, it's because it's seeming like more than just a mere metaphysical possibility.
hmm,
So, well, I don't know. I mean, it's supposedly metaphysically possible, according to many, that there could be a world of just angels or just immaterial souls or something. But we don't really, spend a lot of time thinking about, I mean, those in our, well,
right.
I mean, that our world is just that or something.
Exact. But it does. But it does license this idea that what you would like is an explanation for why the world isn't that way, given that it seems like it could have been that way. But you seem to say that we don't need an explanation for that
I
because
don't
we're
think
just trying
so.
to show. Okay, so good. So
I don't think if it's just merely metaphysically possible and not possible given the way the world is. We don't, okay, not just given the way we know the world is,
given how it
okay,
actually is.
but given the world the way the world is at all, in the ultimate true sense of it,
Mm.
we don't need to explain then, um, yeah, why some certain merely metaphysical possibility doesn't hold.
Uh huh. So so in the case of evolution, where we some people say if you rewound the evolutionary clock, it might unwind very differently than it did. There you're saying that's nomological, so fine. But in
Yeah.
these other cases, you're saying, well, you don't really have anything to grasp onto because you're not talking about the way you're not connecting it to the world to begin with, in a way.
Yeah. I mean, of course, we don't know yet. We don't really know. We don't, that's how I don't, maybe the mind isn't, maybe the mind is distinct from the brain. We don't know for sure. We don't, maybe we have immortal souls. So I think we're still in the process of discovery that we're discovering that.
So, what would it be on your view for that to be true that the world we live in right now had non-physical souls in it?
Oh, well, that I would survive my bodily death.
But isn't that just to say that it's possible that they separate?
No, that they actually would separate upon my bodily death.
Uh-huh.
Not just, it wouldn't be, oh, it's possible. No, that they actually do, that I actually have an afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
That my will is something that is not in any way determined by anything going on in my brain, and that it can affect what happens in my brain.
Mm-hmm. I
Those
see.
sorts of things. Not just that it could, but that it does.
Uh-huh. So because I
So
was hearing the phrase like it's possible they come apart as like that thing that happens when you die. That's what they mean when they say it's possible that they come apart. It means when you die they will. And I say no, when you die they won't. And I say it's not possible and they say it is possible. But it sounds like you're saying no, we're not talking metaphysics then. We're talking nomological stuff.
yeah, we're talking about things that matter.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
It's
but I thought
fine.
that's what they were trying to get at when they defined metaphysical possibility as like how the world could have been. And the
Yeah, but
question
they
of
missed
whether
it.
water is H2O as the question of whether water could have been something besides H2O, the answer to which seems no. And so are you feel the same way about water and H2O like that it's
No. I mean, well, one, I have a lot of problems with that
okay.
topic.
Because
But I don't, yeah, I'm more like with Chomsky on that.
okay.
And I think it's somewhat of a matter of terminology. And I mean, I think some of those thought experiments that are supposed to lead you to think that XYZ wouldn't be water, it's most mainly rhetoric. So
Mhm.
that I think one can go either way
Okay.
on those. I don't think we discovered through science or anything that there's a necessary that it happens in all metaphysically possible worlds. I think we just know about, and also I don't in our world, I mean I have this argument that water actually can't be H2O,
Huh.
which is that pure H2O. Well, what here for the first premise is that water is something that if you drink it in normal amounts the way we do, it's not going to kill you.
Oh,
It's
I
not
see
going
what
to
yeah, you can't do that
systematically
with
kill
pure
you.
H2O.
Right. If you were to drink pure H2O,
Yeah.
as we normally do, you would be dead.
Mhm.
Therefore, water is not H2O. So
Yeah,
it's
the
sort of
clear,
just,
odorless liquid that falls from the sky and is in all the lakes and everything, that's not pure H2O.
yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
No, not at all.
Right.
The closest you get is it's like some sort of vaccine, what they use for vaccine water. But if you were to drink that, it's probably not even entirely pure, but it would kill you. So water
Yeah.
can't be H2O.
But would you say that it's still true that it's mostly H2O in the that water's mostly
Um,
H2O?
well, what do you mean necessarily or
Yeah,
actually the
necessarily.
matter? What necessarily?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I don't have any problem saying that XYZ is water. To define water in terms of its higher level features, that's fine with me.
But
Um,
do you have a problem with saying that our world could have been an XYZ world?
mm, um, as a matter of it's metaphysically possible, or it's actually
Just as a matter of
like
fact,
the
it could have
origin of
been
our
it could
universe and the Big Bang. Somehow it could have been some different substances. I really don't know. I mean, I don't understand the how water evolved well enough to say whether that could have that could have happened in our
oh,
world.
okay. Interesting.
But I like also those examples like, well, the Great Salt Lake we say is water, but a baby has a higher percentage of water, H2O than
I
the
love
Great
that
Salt
fact. I know
Lake.
that's really cool.
Yeah, so
So babies are water is the obvious
you just put
conclusion.
a touch of tea and it turns out to be tea, not water. So,
Okay,
so
so this is very interesting. So why do you think then, if I could ask you, I know we're sort of coming up onto our limit that we agreed on beforehand, so I'm aware of that. But I want to ask you kind of at the end here if you have any opinions or
yeah, okay.
intuitions
Okay,
about
let's see.
why this view about physicalism being entailing supervenience or identity or something like that has taken hold so strongly and become so entrenched. Do you like that's to the point where people like think if you deny it, you don't really know what's going on or like you're
Mhm.
confused in a way or something.
Yes.
So why
Yeah.
what do you have any diagnosis of that? And the answer
Yeah.
can be no. I don't mean to put you on
No,
spot.
I do.
Okay.
I do. And my feeling is sort of what I've like played around with, like expressing this with it. Which came first, the monster or the method, the zombie or the method? And I think it's that um, we, as philosophers, what do we do? Yeah, I mean, we reason a priori.
Mhm.
We reason. So we find theories that we can refute a priori. And what are those? Those are theories that have metaphysically necessary implications. So that the physicalism then has to be the view that the that the narrowly physical world necessarily gives rise to consciousness. Then we're able to, we have a job for philosophers. It gives us work.
It gives us work.
Yeah, so that's my,
Okay.
uh-huh.
Yeah, and it's true because I mean you're open to the view that like what we might call Chalmers physicalism could be turn out to be refuted by this a priori analysis stuff, or Chalmers physicalism could be refuted, whereby that's the definition of the supervenience or whatever kind of physicalism, a priori entailment, etc. So you might show that that's false, but good luck claiming that you've shown physicalism false as a result. And I wish I do think that this is the important point that you're trying to make. And there's a lot of them,
Okay.
but I think this is the one that I
Yeah,
agree
yeah.
with the
No, that's
most.
yeah. Uh-huh.
Is that even if that's false, which I would defend, that kind of physicalism hasn't been refuted. But even if
Yeah.
you're and a lot of people don't agree with that. But even if you think that that kind of physicalism has been refuted, to think that that's physicalism is such a narrow way of thinking about it.
Yeah, good. That's exactly the point that I'm trying to really lead to. And that's I'm on the last chapter now, and that's really what this last chapter is all about.
Okay, so can you give us a little preview of that, or no?
Oh, well, no, I the one that I'm still working on,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
I mean, yeah, so I mean, some of it I've already mentioned. It's I'm trying, well, this is where this denial of S4 comes in. I I'm trying to present some reasons for people to think that, well, yeah, I've always thought that physicalism entails some type of supervenience thesis, which means that the mind necessarily, in any other, that the brain necessarily gives rise to the mind. So in any metaphysically possible world that we have narrowly physical, let's say we have the biological and the chemical and the quantum mechanical, we're going to get creatures with consciousness. I've always thought that, but yeah, okay, what you're saying, this is what my method of, I think, trying to say that physicalism need not be expressed in terms of the a thesis about what happens in merely metaphysically possible worlds. That people will say, okay, yeah, I guess I didn't. Well, what I'd like to say is I realize this is talking to Eric Schwartzgable, or it is an email. This is actually a controversial view that he thinks, but that people thought they believed it, but they've been mistaken about it. He said that that's very controversial. To me, it seems like, oh, I'm doing that all the time. I mean, I thought I believed that, but no. But he said most people say you're not mistaken about your beliefs. So I could say it in a different way, that you used to believe that, and I'm going to try to help you change your mind.
Hmm.
So, and that's just it's by considering some of the situations. Would you say that physicalism is false? Your sense of okay, yes, you want to say physicalism is a supervenience thesis, but why does it matter would it matter if we could create a quantum level that doesn't have any chemical bonds?
Yeah.
That doesn't, what's significant about that to physicalism? What would you find is threatening to your picture of the world? So some people, okay, so this is what as I've been thinking about this and working on this for a long time. And sometimes, and this is one response I haven't really dealt with, and I'm trying to deal with it a little bit. Okay, and I've tried to explain it to people, and I haven't yet had much success.
Okay.
So, poor audience, if anyone's listening, this might not be very successful. But okay, some people want to say, you're asking me to imagine something that I think is impossible, though.
Hmm.
That and I can't, nothing or anything follows from an impossibility. It's just not useful to think in that way. Okay, well, some people have argued that it's not the case, that anything follows from an impossibility, like Daniel Nolan, like you can reason from impossibilities. Okay, but I'm going to put that to the side. Well, this is okay. What I thought was natural to say, that now I find this is very controversial too, is that I'm not asking you to imagine that it's not necessary. I'm just asking you to imagine that it's not necessarily necessary. So that it might not have been necessary.
Yeah.
And so that's the denial of this principle in modal logic that's widely accepted that if anything is necessary, it's necessarily necessary. But I think that in reasoning, it's epistemically, we're reasoning epistemically here,
Hmm.
I think. So there's this epistemic possibility that you could still epistemically maybe think about it. And I think that this is actually how we reason in philosophy when we're coming up with why certain views should be a certain way. So I think the physicalist also who wants to defend supervenience is could be seen as denying S4 or could be seen as somehow like um maybe denying epistemic version of it.
Right.
So because they and I'll ask the physicalist, well, why, why do you think that physicalism should or ought to or does entail a type of supervenience thesis? And they'll say, well, if I imagine the zombie world, that would falsify physicalism. But on your view, the zombie worlds are impossible. So it's impossible, but it's not necessarily so you're imagining that it's not impossible. So we do that, I think, in philosophical reasoning. Somehow I think we're denying
Hmm.
that necessity imply, although I haven't figured this out yet.
Yeah.
Did that make any
No,
that makes sense
I see
to
where
you?
you're going with this. Yeah. No,
You
it's
do.
interesting. Uh-huh.
What, yeah. So that's just something that's been, I guess, for many years, I've been in the back of my mind, sort of thinking about that objection. Well, you're asking me to imagine something that I think is impossible.
Mm-hmm.
I can't really draw any conclusions from that.
Exactly.
And I want to sort of say, well, I'm not asking you to imagine that it's not necessary. I'm just asking you to
Imagine it could have been not necessary.
somehow
It's
could have
possibly
in the
not necessary.
epistemic, maybe just epistemically.
Yeah.
And I'm not asking you to say what follows from that in the world. Just how would you consider it?
Right.
Just as a conceptual. So I had to figure this out.
Exactly. No,
But
I like this because it fits, I think, with the way I think of things. Because in my one paper that I got sucked into writing about this, the deprioritizing the a priori paper, I tried to say, look, I can conceive of a physical duplicate with consciousness. I call them a shambi. I say they have consciousness, phenomenal consciousness, subjectivity, but they're just physical. And
mhm,
when you tell me to imagine a zombie, I say that's impossible because shambis are the thing that are metaphysically possible. And then when the dualist hears me say that, they object in all sorts of ways. And then I go, yeah, that's how we feel about your arguments. So,
I
it's like
see.
you're
Yeah.
asking us, they're like, you can't imagine that consciousness is
Right.
physical.
Yeah.
That's begging the question. I'm like, no,
Mhm.
you're begging the question. They're like, that's
Yeah.
impossible. You can't do that. And I'm like, no, what you're doing is impossible. So
Yeah.
ultimately, it does seem to me a lot of this debate is over that sort of thing, which is
Yeah.
who's imagining the impossible thing. And
Mhm.
and my only point has been to try to say we don't know who's imagining the impossible thing here.
Mhm.
And that's
Right.
where I think we have some common ground is that we're both kind of
Interesting.
saying
Yeah.
we don't know which is
We
the
don't know.
impossible thing or the like
Philosophers, I don't think really are going to solve it myself.
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
ChatGPT will.
Yeah. So, but maybe, I mean, I have all these arguments, but they're really still sort of philosophical arguments. And maybe the best sort of non-argument, but is just that, well, a lot of physicalists and it is defined as a theory about this world, but in a very deceptive way.
Right.
But I care. I think someone could say, I care about what this world is like. And I'm interested in seeing how far we can understand the mind or other processes, higher level processes in lower level terms, how far we can explain, to what degree we can explain them. Um, and that's all I need to make a commitment to.
Yeah.
And that should count as physicalism.
Well said. Okay, on that note, I think we can say thank you for joining me today. It's been just scratching the surface, by the way, of what I think is going to be a really cool book when it's finished, and actually a voice that's needed in this debate. So you said you've been working on this for a long time, and I just want to say we're glad that you're sticking with it,
Okay,
and that this
thanks.
is coming together in this way because whether you agree, in my opinion, whether you agree or not with your ultimate view, working through the cases you do and the way that you do is useful for
Mhm.
everyone who's thinking about these things. So that
Mhm.
whether you don't have to be fully convinced to get something out of what you're writing, I would say. Although I find it
Okay.
pretty convincing.
Okay, thanks. Well, thanks, Richard. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. And it's really helpful also to try to, as I was telling you before, I often don't talk about my work that much. It's always writing, but
Yeah,
speaking it, getting it out there does help the writing so much. So
it does.
thank you.
Exactly. And we'll have you back afterwards when it's all finished if you're
Okay,
available.
great. Thank you so much.
Cool. And
Okay.
just hang around for 1 second. I'll say bye off air.
Okay.
Otherwise, thanks
Sure.
again, Barbara.
Okay.
Okay. We are